Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the HR and Payroll 2.0 podcast. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Pete. Today, it's me bringing one of my favorite people ever as our guest. I want to introduce everyone to Sue Danino. Sue, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, and just as background, Sue and I met actually through a former employer, ISG, where we were both doing our consulting client-side advisory gigs, right? And I was firmly in the HR practice, and Sue was firmly in the finance and rest of BPO side of the house, right? And so we had some great opportunity to get to know each other there. And payroll, as all of our audience will know, sits between those two worlds. So sometimes it was in her finance towers and sometimes it was in my HR towers. And that gave us lots of reason to collaborate. And we've been fast friends ever since.
Absolutely.
All right, you want me to do the
All
honors,
right,
Julie?
yep, Pete, you do the honors today.
All right, Sue. So look, we ask every guest that comes to HR and Payroll 2.0, how did you get into the finance world and why on earth have you stuck around so long?
Well, come on now. Finance is the place to be. So
Uh,
I started my career in audit in public accounting. And so while I think that's a great training ground, kind of moved my way through various shared services roles and consulting with Julie and into some executive roles. So it's been an interesting ride. And I think finance is a great place to learn a lot and provide a lot of value.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And super
And
important, obviously.
And Pete, it's fair to say, like, we have been talking for quite some time about making sure that we're bringing kind of the finance lens into our conversations on payroll. And I think, besides fintechs and some other, different things we've done, I think Sue's going to be our first, right?
I think so. So you might be our first CFO lens here. And I'm excited about that because to your point, I've lived my career like that where payroll was such a bridge, one foot in HR, one foot in finance. And that controllership element of this is so key. So yeah, I've got a lot of questions too about where things are headed.
Awesome. Well, I'm super
Yeah.
excited. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Do it. All right. So, part of this world that Sue and I grew up in involves, me being exposed to and having as clients a lot of CHROs and VPs of operations on the HR side and Sue on the finance side. But Sue, I thought it might be good, just since you are our first CFO finance lens, just talk a little bit about the taxonomy in finance. Most of our listeners will know HR taxonomy, so they'll understand recruiting, onboarding, all the different pieces that fall under HR, and payroll we count as one of them. But how does finance taxonomy work, and where does payroll fit?
So finance has kind of the typical things that folks are most commonly aware of are like bookkeeping, general ledger, adjustments, reporting, financial statements. But it also includes all the transactional sides. So paying your bills, accounts payable, receiving money, accounts receivable, setting up billing, things like that. Um, and then payroll is also very transactional. And so in my life, I've always had payroll reporting to me in finance. So if you were to ask me how frequently do I see it? 100% of my career has always been reporting to finance. But I think that, out and about, it might be more like 50-50, depending on kind of who's running the show.
Oh,
Yeah.
you cut off my ability to say who owns payroll because you've seen it
Yeah.
always on your side of the house.
Well,
and
right. I
mostly
always have. So it's kind of funny because I'd say, oh, well,
Yeah,
it's always 100% finance. But we know that that's not the case.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big debate, right, Pete?
It
It's a
is,
big
it
debate.
is. And I'm studying this a little bit because I think there is no right answer. I think it's really about the culture of the organization. I'm personally, I lean a little bit more finance, I think, because of the controllership element of this. When you understand, particularly in a big enterprise, the P&L hit and the risks that come with that, I think it just makes sense from a process perspective. But what I've seen a lot of great success in is a hybrid where HR has an ownership for the care and feeding element of the employees and the inquiry support and customer support, but payroll structurally reports into finance from a controllership standpoint. I think that's what we did at Disney, and I've seen that in many, many places that works really well when they can work well together. That's another key thing. But
Absolutely.
Yes, and Sue, something I
yeah,
don't know if you're seeing it as much, but I'm more often seeing some common breakout points. So with
yeah,
HR owns payroll, Treasury is never owned by payroll, right? So Treasury is always on your side of the house. But what about like tax or general ledger, sometimes payroll accounting. I don't know if you have any particular areas where you kind of naturally see the breaks, or the biggest synergies.
Right. And again, with my experience, I've always seen kind of tax reporting up through finance and payroll accounting as part of the payroll function, which has reported up through finance.
So within finance and within those towers, how does finance view payroll as a strategic? I mean, is it one of the more? Is it strategic? Is there a strategic angle to payroll, or is it considered a strategic function? How does it stack up to some of the other finance towers that might be maybe at the top of the heap from a strategy perspective?
So I'm a little biased because I had all of those different shared services, including payroll report through me. And I'm a big believer in data. And so if there's data to be had in every function, for me, that's very critical. And I think that's important to be able to report from a finance perspective. And so when you're talking about strategy, there's a heck of a lot of strategy that you can, leverage payroll data for in terms of cost efficiency and looking at how you're effectively handling an employee and creating like that ultimate employee experience, which again, Pete, back to your comment, like we need to arm in arm kind of with HR to be able to provide that. And I think in looking at the data
Yeah.
across the board in, your legal entities, how many people are in what types of pay groups, how many unions do you have, all of that data, if you analyze it and crunch it the right way, which I love crunching data, you can definitely come forth with some great business cases to say, here's a strategic bend on why we should do what we're doing and recommending for payroll.
Do you think more C-suites are coming around to that understanding and not looking at payroll as just sort of like car insurance, as I
I
like to call it
I
sometimes?
wish, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, I don't think we're there yet. I think
yeah.
that I've personally created great business cases for, hey, here's the reason why we should have all of our payroll, our HR, timekeeping, policies, everything in one platform. But because the C-suite has this kind of mentality of, "Hey, if it ain't
Mhm.
broke, we're not gonna fix it," and where everybody's getting paid timely and
Yep,
accurately, not
yep,
really appreciating what's happening in the background. There's a lot of things that
yeah.
have to happen, right, Julie, to tie it all together and
Amen.
make it happen, and all those kinda crazy nights where, yes, you are up till 1 in the morning 'cause you had a blip, nobody knows about that because we're just
Yeah.
making it happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Julie, I've been on the end of a lot of those deals where that was the result of a paralyzed buyer is these, especially enterprise would say, it's just too risky. It's just, it works. Why? Let's just throw some money
Yeah.
on more heads. And then a no decision happens.
oh, I could tell you stories on that one.
Yeah. It's great. It's frustrating. It's
It's
frustrating
very
because it's like
frustrating.
they get right at the edge of the answer, and then they get scared of the answer, and
Yeah.
then they go down the same path again for a few more years. And now, obviously, cloud started in my career. Cloud started to force that, but now I think it's more compliance and failure and potential failures that are starting to force that, which is problematic in and of
Oh,
itself.
for sure.
Yeah, and truthfully, I'm sure Sue and I have some of the same and some very different stories
Yeah,
as well. But that's what like that leads to things like these very large global organizations you would think would be at the forefront having 50-year-old, legacy technologies or,
yeah, or 50
other just
technologies.
or crazy things like we're going to stand up a workday or some SaaS solution, right? SAP, success factors, but they keep the legacy payroll running behind the scenes and that's what's crunching the payroll. And it's like,
Yeah.
how the hell are you doing this?
Time gets that too. Workforce management gets that
Yeah,
treatment too
yeah.
sometimes. They let that lag and then, and that's the hard part, the heavy lift for payroll, and then wonder why they're still struggling because payroll and time are still lagging behind the rest of the infrastructure. It just doesn't make any sense when that's the stuff that's really gonna get them in trouble.
That's right.
I kind of feel like one of the biggest opportunities for payroll to shine as a strategic function is in merger and acquisition or divestiture
Oh,
scenarios. And I know, Sue, have had a lot of experience with some of those. Anything anecdotally about, how those situations can give you maybe an opportunity to elevate or when they're brought in and how they're used in those big corporate decisions?
Absolutely. So, most recently, the company that I was involved with, we did a lot of acquisitions. And so, where I feel we did a really good job is that we had payroll on that acquisition team, right in the forefront, being part of, how are we going to bring the employees in? How are we going to get them paid day one? And being able to talk about systems and, if we're not in that country, do we need a PEO? And like, how do we handle that kind of situation? So I feel like we did a really good job of having that representation. I think that's super important.
I love hearing that because in HR, I don't see that happen as often as it should. You would think so, right? We're moving employees, we're putting them all together. They should be right at the table. But oftentimes they're not. And if they are, it's weird, but sometimes benefits are the first guys at the
Yeah.
table.
M&A is one area where, Julie, where I've seen a number of organizations, senior leadership, and even HR kind of step back and go, whoa, this is something that we should have, we thought this was a different thing. And they learn a lot through that and then come away a bit more matured from it. Others don't, but a lot of them do. And I think that that's a really good thing because then they see like, okay, wait a minute, there's a lot of moving parts here. Payroll's a big piece. Finance is a big piece. The HR elements of this is a big piece. And it can't just be made in a silo. Decisions made in a silo, for sure. This is stuff I don't think AI can do. Is what I'm worried for, right? To me, that's the project oversight that I think finance, HR, and payroll are going to have over AI doing this work, but still really, being very intimately making decisions and governing it, right?
Well,
Because
I completely
man, they're
agree.
gnarly.
There's a lot of,
Yeah,
and we used AI in some payroll functions, and to be able to crank out and handle data and do kind of the more mundane things that are very rules driven, I think that's fine and great. But you're
yeah,
always going to have that brain in the room, that's like analyzing and poking holes into the scenarios to make sure that it's working properly.
yeah. And if you're going to do it more than once, if you're in an organization doing it more than once, you need a playbook.
Oh,
You need an
absolutely.
M&A
Yeah.
playbook for HR, payroll,
Yeah.
finance, all of that.
Yep, we
Yeah.
we
Ideally,
had that for
ideally.
sure, and it was
Yeah.
nice because every time we did an acquisition, we'd learn something new, and we just kept
Right.
expanding the
Yeah.
playbook and adding in the pieces that were missing, like, "Oh, well, why don't we have this in there about, credit for accounts receivable?" Or whatever it was. So it was nice to be able to keep that. It was, like, evolving and growing.
Yeah, that would be a dream, I think, for a lot of organizations who have these things stuffed at them and something certainly to work toward. Okay, so I thought, Sue, we might try like payroll through the finance looking glass and just throw out a couple of different areas and see, like how you coming from the finance and the CFO function view some of these different components because I think in many instances it's a little bit different than either the priority or the emphasis or the point of view that HR would have on them. You can't even think about payroll and finance without thinking about risk and compliance. So, what sort of lens would you throw on from a finance perspective? Other you have audit, you have everything under your umbrella, right? I think people look to finance for those things. So how does that fit?
Absolutely. So I think one of the key things and this is part of the strategic lens as well, is looking at your compliance as it relates to, your local, your state, your federal, your country requirements. Also from a legal perspective, looking at legal entities, consolidation, filings, all of that kind of stuff, the tax components. So I think there's a lot of gotchas that if you aren't paying attention to that, you're going to potentially have some high risk areas. And that's where, again, I think there's a strategy to be had because you have to be able to know what you're looking for and do that work and be prepared for that because you don't want to get caught. And then all of a sudden you're blowing up with you know, penalties and interest and all sorts of problems.
Yeah. Plus the controllership is different sometimes too. I've learned the requirements of that. And that's a, different story but depending on your size. But
It feels like to me like there is still also some risk and compliance elements that sit closer to the labor law side though that,
yep.
payroll is aware of, but a lot of that compliance activity is, related to the big ticket movement of monies, right?
I mean, I can tell you, and I won't bore you with all the details and the umpteen hours spent on it, but we had a situation where we had so many payrolls because of all the unions that were involved. And if a
Yep.
payroll is not written properly, and you're paying out, times two, and it was supposed to be times three, you've got exposure on your hands. And there was a lot of long hours spent really trying to make sure that the rules were set properly. So and
Yeah.
that gets really into nitty gritty when you've got a lot of unions too.
Yeah, and good word. If anybody could ever get ahead of the union things that get decided in contracting to just take a little bit of ridiculous out of them, we
Yeah.
would be just all the better for it. But it
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
seem like that's even
But
possible.
I think that's another opportunity when we're talking about relationships. So finance and HR arm in arm, but also legal, because the legal, the HR contract legal person is the one going and having those discussions. So
Yeah.
having kind of that, routine cadence of, all right, what's working, what's not, when is the contract going to bid, when do we need to give you our feedback because there's certain things that aren't working.
Julie, I think I've shared this on the podcast, but when I first started working at Disney in Hollywood, I worked by way of ABC television and all the unions that went with that and some of the stuff that they did in the West Coast too. And I was really fortunate that the payroll leader that I was replacing there that was retiring, she was 30 plus years in, emphasized with me how important, just coming off of what you said there, Sue, about collaboration, it's very important for payroll, especially labor relations, even HR, to have, I think HR normally behind labor relations, to have a good relationship with the union leadership. Because she told me, she said, listen, if you can win their respect and you can have a good line of communication with them, they will call you before they go to the news or before they go to the
Yeah.
president of
Yeah.
the network.
Right.
And I think that goes a long way because what that did was for us when we were building our shared service center was we proactively went to them and included them in the conversations about what we were doing. And we made sure that they had an open line so that we could work through issues together so that it didn't create this us against them. And then we became sort of the bad guy. And again, they weren't caught off guard by things. And it actually benefited us quite a bit. So that collaboration, I think, just like a vendor, if you can, in some cases, you can't do this. You have to go through labor relations. But where you can, build a relationship with them, it's going to benefit you as a senior leader in sort of the diplomacy and the navigation of being a union workshop, if you will.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one and see what we get out of this. I was thinking about finance and the, FP&A, the financial planning and analysis stuff, which is so close in some organizations, especially those that are labor intensive, to workforce strategy on the HR side of the house. So I'd just love to get a little bit of your thoughts on, whether finance leaders see payroll as influencing talent retention and workforce strategy in that way, or is it really purely kind of a cost center, lens that gets applied when you're in finance?
Right. So I would say two things. One, from a cash flow perspective. So I always worked arm in arm with our FP&A leads to make sure that, we had that information accurate. And if there was going to be any special pays or things like that, that would be accounted for appropriately in the cash forecast. And that's like the lifeblood, right? Every corporation's got to get their forecasts really tight. So that was super important. And then from employee retention, I mean, I think payroll is super important, again, working with HR to create that employee experience. If you don't pay an employee accurately and on time every time that they're getting their pay, you got a problem. And so that's really, I think payroll is key in helping to create that employee experience.
What are your thoughts on? I don't know if you've noticed lately, but some of the HCMs, particularly the mid markets, have started to bring FP&A, financial planning and analysis, strategic workforce planning, much closer into their solutions as an offering. Where before that might have sat in ERP, it's nuzzling up, very nicely, I think, to HR. What are your thoughts on that? It sounds like it supports what you were just saying, but do you like that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would support, but when I think about traditionally how corporations are running their FP&A and how they've already invested
Mhm.
in their current reporting and systems, I think it would be hard pressed to convince them to kind of move into, taking it out and putting it into your solution where payroll
Yeah.
is. I think that would be a tough one.
Yeah, but thinking about that small market, mid market
Yeah,
though,
that
I
could
think
be.
it's
That could
probably
be.
yeah, it's good for them because I think they're getting access to something that's a little bit more, big boy finance, if you will, with their HR, where they're maybe not ready to entirely need a full
Yeah.
ERP. So,
I think you're right.
yeah, I think
Mid market and
it's
even
maturing them.
smaller, I think you're right. I'm
Yeah,
thinking about just kind of the payroll experiences that I've had, which had been the bigger corporations that was probably would be a tough sell.
I
yeah,
thought you were gonna say that, and I actually have only really seen it, the lever pushed heavily when you have a largely human asset company, somebody that has
yeah.
mostly
Pro
human assets. They're not
services.
really professional services, they're not really
Yeah,
producing anything. But
yeah,
on the same token, we see a lot of our HCM buddies now, either, starting to think about adding or bringing in and combining with ERPs, and Workday themselves, right, has been making quite a push into its finance modules as well. So
Yeah.
I don't know. You still see that as mostly a down market opportunity, Sue?
I mean, from what I'm seeing, I would say yes. And as we're looking at, and now I'm working with smaller, very entrepreneurial size, companies. So I would see that it could be something more appetizing for the smaller groups.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's shift over to technology and integration, because I think you have some interesting thoughts for us around how finance views the technology and integration that touches payroll, and in fact to what degree they have the purviews on all of the ecosystem that is related. What are your thoughts?
So I think that from a finance perspective, systems are key. And again, I think driven from what's happening on the ERP side. And so it's always challenging when you've got more than one payroll provider in the mix, which I've had that experience multiple times now. And you try to make the case really and do this business case analysis on, hey, we've got three providers. We really want to get to one. And here's all of the, economies of scale that we're going to get. Here's all the benefits and putting together that business case. And it's still a very hard sell, unfortunately. Again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it because we see everybody's getting paid. They're getting paid accurately. This is great. Let's focus our time and money and energy on something else.
Yeah, and I think you've told me, you and I have had conversations before where you said, honestly, I think finance has a more holistic look at the technology landscape, right? And that
Absolutely.
could just be because HR people are like, oh, I don't want to know. Just put the data in my system so I can use it. Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think because we're numbers driven from just that's kind of how our brains work, right? We're going to take something and tackle it with the data and the business case. And a lot of times coming from the HR side, that's not the approach, right? And so we can work together and we have worked together successfully to be able to say, okay, give us your thoughts and input so we can help you create a business case so we can get together on the same side of this so that we can present it holistically.
I've seen a lot of cases too where the finance side of the house doesn't have the integration to the finance platforms coming out of payroll. They might be, in some cases, just as happy to get a report that they can manipulate and upload in certain ways. What are your thoughts on if that integration into the GLs in particular is happening? Is it a good idea? We see more people talking about APIs and like having it just shoot over and go without any breakpoint.
Real
Right,
time,
right.
real time.
So I'm
Real
a big
time.
believer in APIs and automatic interfaces. I am not a supporter of manual anything. So I've seen that, I've heard
Yep.
that. It makes me cringe, frankly, because that just introduces and multiplies your human error aspect, to that degree. But I absolutely like we tried when I oversaw payroll at whatever, company I was at to try to have the automatic interfaces because you can't there's too many things happening. There's too many places where you're going to have an issue, an
Yeah.
error. You can't put yourself like that's a risk that you don't need to have, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was just speaking with an organization yesterday whose finance people were having none of even integration, much less API, with the data coming out of HR and payroll and going into finance. And I get it. I think they when you're the checker checking the checking and checking checking the data, it's like, do I really want every little incident that happens in HR that causes some retro something and payroll numbers start shifting around? Because, I could see the potential for some to say, well, I have to reconcile every day what is going on with the changes that are coming in real time as data is flowing around? But, automation is important. So I
Right.
see it at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I
It's
think when you're
crazy.
talking about those retros, right? And that kind of makes me cringe as well. But as
Yeah.
long as you've thoroughly tested and it works the way it needs to work, then I think you're good. If you've
Yeah.
got issues where it's not working properly, I could see where you might have to step in and do something, there to retest manually or what have you. But I just the human, element to me is just unfortunately it's a risk.
It is for sure. Let's not leave the systems and integration, technology integration section without just asking you what you're seeing happening with automation and AI. AI is getting a lot of buzz, but finance has had RPA forever, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
robotic process automation.
So it's interesting. I think that, and I sat through a class, CPA class, maybe 2 years ago, and the lady that was teaching it said, it's like when the microwave came out, right? Like, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not using the microwave. Oh my gosh, I can't do it." And you started to, like, try to use it, and then you got yourself going. And I think that's the same thing with AI. Like, you gotta try to use it, you gotta figure it out. I use it every day, personal, work stuff, like, I think it's amazing, and there's ways to learn how to use it properly. And then to your point earlier, Pete, like, you still have to be managing, reviewing. I think there's absolutely a huge role for it. I don't think it's gonna replace, everybody's job. I think it's just gonna create different jobs that need to
Yeah.
be, more managerial and oversight.
Do you see companies making investments into the back office side of finance and starting to try and take advantage of some of this?
I
Yeah.
do, and I think that some people are more willing to dive into it than others, and I think the ones that are diving in are getting, kind of that cost effectiveness a lot
Yeah.
quicker, and there's a lot. I mean, there's just so many
Like
things.
what areas do you see people kind of leading in with?
I honestly, when I was overseeing shared services most recently, we were using it across the board. So in payroll, accounts
Yeah.
payable, accounts receivable, journal entries. I mean, you
Yeah.
gotta
Yeah.
you gotta keep it going. There's so much
Yeah.
data that you can benefit from when you're looking at trends and all of those kind of things. And why the heck wouldn't you use that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I notice it as a customer, I guess I would say, to big tech firms or big enterprise, in their AP. I notice the automation, happening there as well. So you're right. I think they are kind of picking off those
Hey, a lot
traditionally heavy lift use cases.
lot better scale too. I mean, finance has always had the
Yeah,
advantage of
very
scale and
rules
just
based, right?
multiple transactions where HR has so much wild, wacky, crazy
Yeah.
stuff going they
Well,
can't.
it's quite black and white, I feel like, in finance, whereas in HR, it's a little gray. You know what I mean? It
Yeah,
just
for the
depends on
black
what we're
and
talking
white
about.
rules
Yeah.
based is absolutely like the best. It used to be
Yeah.
that's what we looked at for, outsourcing. Now it's kind of like let's look at that for creating the automation.
Yeah. I'm curious what the management audit element of that's gonna look like in the future too, though. Like, just there's so many little things I can think of that they're gonna have to contend with.
In terms of doing that and
Documentation
doing the audits, you mean?
during audits, yeah,
Yeah.
coming in through audits and kinda saying, "Hey, there was AI here," or "Was this a human?" Like, I don't know, there's just so many things. We could probably do a whole episode just on that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
That's gonna be really interesting. I've obviously able to help them do audits a lot better, uh, but I'm curious what some of the can of worms it's gonna open in that
Yeah,
area.
and I think for me, it's always been that documentation is important. So even
Yeah,
with my current clients now that are smaller, the first thing we look at is, all right, we need to get process documentation. We need to put it in place. We need to have it. And those are, going to help the auditors certainly when you're looking at the interfaces for AI and such.
One of the other things I think that I've noticed, Sue, that we're talking about just like at scale now. I mean, it has been really gone crazy in the last 24 months. Is embedded finance and embedded payments. Again, that sort of integrated ability to have, those things on demand throughout the business and in the flow of business. Are you seeing companies lean into that as well? Because definitely the products are coming to market and all of the solutions are just rushing to hit that.
Yeah, so when I was still in corporate America, were not yet leaning into that, and now I'm in a smaller kind of more in the entrepreneurial world, so we're
Yeah.
not really there for them
Yeah,
at all.
definitely not.
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see because with the digital money movement, I mean, I just feel like all of it's gonna be very on demand, and very, very rapid. It's pretty cool.
How about we just take a moment? You started to allude to it earlier, Sue, on globalization, right? So I know you've been involved, as have I, in a number of, the business case. What do you have to do to try to move the needle on consolidating just the number of different providers, the number of different ways that we're doing payroll and the related activities, treasury,
Yeah.
and all the parts of our end to end process?
Yeah, not to
Yeah,
mention it feels like everybody's doing it, whether they're 10 people or,
yeah,
10,000 people. It's almost like a game for everyone to play now.
Well, and I think again, it's going to go back to systems. So to be able to look at what functionality is available, and especially in country. So Julie, you and I know that we spent a lot of time going back and forth on, what providers could provide the best payroll experience within a country. And unfortunately, we never found one at the time that could like do it all in every country. So then we end up with like a piece together model where you've got various service providers. So, I mean, I think the globalization view would be like whoever can get to that ability to service all of the countries and have, the one-stop shop, that's ideally where you want to go to for utopia for payroll, right? And we couldn't get there. I don't know if anybody's getting there yet, but I know there's been a lot of changes in the landscape, within the industry. But to me, it would be one provider where you can have like one set of rules. You've got, consolidation where you can with your legal entities, and you're looking, across kind of all of the areas that you're servicing.
I love that you mentioned the consolidation with legal entities because, from my
Mm,
perspective, there's so much that happens on the finance side of the house that will drive, the types of efficiencies and scale you can get on the payroll side of the house. So if
yeah.
you're acquiring, divesting, you've got legal entities all over the place. If your GLs are on totally different systems, in every country or in every business unit or location, and yet I suspect that when finance is thinking about legal entity integration or harmonization of GLs, I suspect that payroll might not be the biggest, like why we should do this. Or is it?
Well,
Well, it should be the first
yeah,
person
well,
that first
so
group they
yeah.
call, right?
So fortunately, with the way that we had our playbooks and our acquisition team set up, payroll was right at, had a front seat. And so we worked really closely with legal. And so that was part of consideration in terms of how we're going to get people paid day one. What system were they going to move to? What were the pay, was the pay frequency going to look like? All of that kind of stuff. So I think that was actually something we probably did pretty well.
What if payroll reported to legal, Julie?
Yeah.
Wonder what that would do.
Oh, I've seen that.
Wonder what that would do for their stature maybe. I mean, really, you think about it, man. I mean, we talk
I do
about,
see it.
yeah, what they're doing in Australia. They're credentialing them on par with lawyers and CPAs now. So
Interesting.
very
Mid-market
compliance.
mid-market clients too as well. I have often seen the chief legal officer own payroll and HR for that
Oh,
matter,
wow.
just
Yeah,
because of all the labor laws and,
totally.
all the benefits stuff that's in there.
Yeah,
I can't say I've seen it, heavily upmarket, but unless you
yeah.
lost a position and it's gotta
Yeah,
go
yeah, yeah.
somewhere for a
But I
while.
mean,
Yeah, I think that
it's so closely tied, you know?
yeah, and I think that goes back to the relationship point, right? First of all, relationships are key no matter what we're talking about, right? But
Right.
when you talk
Especially
about
now.
HR, payroll, legal, you know, finance,
Finance.
it's just all
Right,
you
right.
have to be arm in arm. You have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that gives me pause for like the last question. Then I do want to shift a little bit and talk about, down market, and you're working on the other end of the spectrum now. But before we go there, just share with us a little bit your thoughts on CFO and CHRO collaboration or just finance and HR collaboration. It feels like when those conversations come up, there's a natural animosity, about payroll residing in one versus the other or clash or, priorities that aren't quite aligned. And yet, as you've said a couple of times already today, like ideally that partnership, they need to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
How often do you see that?
Yeah.
You had that in one of your corporate environments, but I know you've seen, 100 times more.
Yes. So unfortunately, there's that static, as we know. And I think my role, whether I was in consulting or finance leader, was always let's figure this out and get together and figure out what it looks like for both of us to be able to have that strategic element. What can we do together to make the employee experience the best? So I think it's working together, and I'm always going to say it's relationships, and you got to develop those, and that's one of my main tenants. So I think that has to be everybody else's too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's gotta be a lot of diplomacy in leading these processes, at least in my experience. You gotta be able to reach across the, the other side of the business and work with people. And it's, yeah, it's definitely a skill.
Yeah, for sure. I think, for those who are payroll leaders and aspiring to seat at the table type of stuff, you've heard numerous folks and guests talk about data, and data is your secret weapon to be able to open conversations and have perspective that folks are really interested in and relationships, for
For
sure.
sure.
All right. So, Sue, I know that you've kind of, and you've alluded to already that you've kind of moved down to the other end of the market from the super big of the bigs to the smaller down market. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I've actually seen other HR leaders. And I don't know if it's, a time of life thing or just a different new challenge where it feels like you're growing and growing and trying to handle the biggest of the big and the most global of the global. And then at a certain point in time, all of these, incredible large company leaders are moving into smaller market scenarios and bringing those same concepts down market. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and like how that impacts, your whole lens.
Okay. So I joined a group called Focus CFO. We have about 190 CFOs across the US, and we do part time or fractional CFO work. So generally, like the client size would be maybe 5 million to 100 million, generally more entrepreneurial. And what we do is we go in and we support strategy, right? So a lot of these folks are not in a position to hire a full time CFO. That cost would not be, absorbable for them. So one day a week, half day a week, go in and be able to support and help them sort out like what do the systems look like? What do your financials look like? Is everything accurate? Do we have metrics? Do we have reporting? What do you want to do with your business? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to exit? Do you want to hand it on as a legacy to your family? So all of the strategy parts, which is really kind of cool and fun. And it allows for I think some of us that are more seasoned, we've had a lot of experience across the board, be able to boil it down and provide great advice to these entrepreneurs that are maybe just, they're very well versed in their industry, but they're not necessarily somebody that's run payroll, that understands finances, that runs, how to set up a chart of accounts and run the financials and things like that. So that's what we do. And it's been really interesting for me because in the beginning I was like, wow, I have all this kind of up here stuff, right? And that's what you and I talked about, Julia. Like, how do you boil it down? And there's just so many things that we've done in our careers that you can take that and pinpoint and really insert it into the day to day for these entrepreneurs. I'll give you an example. So we're looking at, okay, we need to hire a part-time bookkeeper. Okay, we're going to put the bookkeeper on QuickBooks. Well, the owner is on QuickBooks and owns all the functionality of QuickBooks. Well, we need to make sure that that part-time bookkeeper can't go in and create a vendor and pay themselves, right? So it's that segregation of duties and risk and all those things that we automatically think about because that's what we've built,
Yeah,
controls around. But the owner might not be thinking about that necessarily or how to
right.
do
You're
it.
maturing them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so there's a lot of
Yeah.
cool things like that where you can say like, "Oh, I used to do all this contract work." Well, we need to do a contract for a new system that we're looking at. Well, we've got to ask all these questions and we've got to look at the data and all the security and all those things again that we've done at like big, high, multi-million dollar levels, we can absolutely boil it down. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is awesome. I love the creator economy for this, just the ability for people to go and take their skills and apply them in different ways and with a lot of flexibility. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Having my own business for a while, like I just even doing payroll for yourself at the point in time at which you're beyond your own little self in an organization, and
Absolutely.
you're starting to grow and have other people that need to get paid is such a shock, shock to
It's a
the system.
responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It is for sure. Awesome. All right,
very
Pete,
cool.
what else, what other things haven't I asked that,
Well,
have
okay.
been burning on your mind? Because I
I
know
want
you
to,
have some.
I got one. I got one to close this out. Sue, I want to ask you a yes, no, maybe question. Okay. It's an easy one.
Oh, no.
And I guess you could say maybe at a certain level, whatever, put it through whatever lens you want. But payroll in the C suite, yes, no, maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. At the right size, at the right what do you think? I think it's at the right size
At
company,
the
it makes
right
sense.
size company, I think in this, in the larger
Yeah,
corporations, that's not gonna happen, obviously, but I think that there could be the right seat kind of mid to smaller.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think we're seeing again, Australia is a great example. They're lobbying for this, as a dotted line to the C-suite to be able to have a separation of control over payroll so that they can be, a bit autonomous in the business and not for fraud purposes.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's interesting. So we'll see. We'll see. Look, I don't care. I don't know that it has to be there personally. I don't even know that you have to necessarily call them. It's the chief payroll officer. Just call them. just call them at the right time. Just call them ahead of time. Respect their insights. Get their perspective because, to your point, the M&A, the large scale org redesigns. Look right now, Julie. Have you seen the angst right now over the Amazon Whole Foods integration? 100,000 people. I thought that was already done a while
Yeah.
back, but I get the whole culture pushback. I understand where there's some concern, but that's a lot of work on payroll and HR too, by the way. Large scale org redesigns are painful. And I think that when you can execute them properly, and that's where payroll and HR need to be sitting there talking through what that means to the business and how do we make it successful. I think it's so important. So I think it's just about, bringing them in at the right time.
Hey, I have a fun one.
Yeah.
So I was on a call the other day with I don't even remember who, but we were talking about the imminent end to the government shutdown, right? And it
Yeah.
was probably on a Wednesday.
It is over,
And
right? They ended
and
it.
it, they Congress did. So on that
Okay.
Wednesday, before it was voted over, news pundits were saying it's imminent, they're gonna vote and they're gonna end this and the air traffic and everybody will have their pay by Friday. As a
Right.
payroll person, I was
Payroll
thinking,
people are freaking out.
Yeah.
"What?
They're in the background going, no, 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 no.
What are you smoking
Yeah, maybe
that
next
Wow.
Friday.
says you can pass this on Thursday and the very next
Uh,
day, everybody's gonna get paid and back paid
right.
within
But
that?"
Sure.
honestly,
Yeah.
that's so classic, right? That's
Oh, it is.
That's
classic because there's
cart
not the,
before the
like,
horse.
full appreciation of all of what has to happen behind the scenes
Yeah.
to make it happen.
Crazy.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
that's
It made me
great.
laugh.
That's a
That's
good
a great
one.
example. That's a great example. Wow.
All right. Well, listen, why don't we wrap this up, Sue, with just asking you where can folks get a hold of you?
So I am available on LinkedIn. My email is s.danino@focuscfo.com. And I, be happy to chat with anybody about anything, payroll or otherwise, CFO, fractional services, whatever it is. Always happy to have a chat, especially with my good friend Julie here.
Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much, Sue. We really appreciate you joining
Of
us.
course, and great
Yeah.
to meet you, Pete. And we'll look forward to more things together.
Pete'll have show notes, of course, with all the contact details in them. And we'll see
Yeah.
you then again next time, everyone.
Awesome.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you.